Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Run. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We're going to have a great show for you today. Let's get right with it because it's sort of a long program, a lot of things to cover. We have Tim Wise with us, and in having Tim Wise with us and all the other things we have to talk about, we got to go ahead and get busy right away. So anyhow, title of the show today, Tim Wise, an anti-racist crusader, talks Minneapolis and more. CNN reporter explodes. Anti-racist crusader Tim Wise discusses the racist police brutality in America and more. There's excellent reporting out of Minneapolis from MSNBC that gets real. You guys have to stick around after Tim Wise to listen to Trymaine and talk about it. Hey, Bruce, how you doing, my dear brother? How you doing? Okay, so anti-racist crusader Tim Wise discusses the racist police brutality in America and more. There is an excellent reporting out of Minneapolis from MSNBC that gets very, very, very real. Tim Wise visits with us to discuss America's metastasized cancer and how to eradicate it. Tim Wise is among the most prominent anti-racist writers and educators in the United States, spending 25 years speaking to an audience. Well, you know what? I won't repeat that here. I'm just going to get busy and get into that part of the program, and then we'll take it from there. So, folks, arriba, aquí viene el señor Tim.
Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. I'm here with Tim Wise. Tim Wise is among the most prominent anti-racist writers and educators in the United States, spending 25 years speaking to audiences in all 50 states and over 1,000 colleges and high school campuses at hundreds of professionals of academic conferences and to community groups across the country. Wise is the author of 7 books, including his latest, Under the Influence, Shaming the Poor, Praising the Rich, and Sacrificing the Future of America. You'll see that in the links for you to check that out as well. Wise has been featured in several documentaries, including the 2013 Media Education Foundation release, White Like Me, Race, Racism, and White Privilege in America. The film, which he co-wrote and co-produced, has been called a phenomenal educational tool in the struggle against racism and one of the best films made on the unfinished quest for racial justice. Wise appears regularly on CNN and MSNBC. Senor Wise, welcome aboard Politics Done Right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to start right in the meat of things. When you heard about what I call the assassination in Minneapolis, what were your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was obviously just a horrific video and a horrific incident. And I also realized, as was the case with the video in Georgia of Arbery, that were it not for the video, were it not for the fact that we're in an era where that kind of stuff can actually be captured by someone's cell phone, that none of us would know anything about it, and that it would have been covered up and papered over. So that was the first thought. The second thought, which I found really incredibly disturbing, but I've had it before, was contrasting the relative lack of outrage by white Americans, obviously with some exceptions, but the general lack of outrage on the part of white Americans relative to the outrage that white Americans have been expressing over having to wear a mask in Costco or having to stand 6 feet away from someone when they go into Trader Joe's, or having to maybe stay inside because there's a global pandemic and you don't want to kill anyone or die yourself. Like the idea that tyranny is taking over, which is what a lot of these white folks at these state capitals seem to believe, because of these social distancing requirements. But when a black man is killed by an agent of the state, by 4 agents of the state, the other 3 standing around watching it happen and doing nothing, that's real tyranny, that's real oppression, and they say nothing at all. And so I just find it fascinating to look at the contrast between the things that white Americans protest, by and large, and the things which we don't. And obviously there have been some fantastic, white folks who have joined in solidarity in Minneapolis and around the country and are fed up with this stuff too. So I don't want to suggest that there aren't some white allies out there doing the work. It's just obvious to me that by and large, white America is on a very different wavelength in terms of what constitutes oppression. And that's something that concerns me greatly.
Now, Tim, because of the context of what you said, I need to ask it in this manner. You're a white guy. Please tell me.
I am indeed.
Please tell me because it is this is important, and this is what I try to get across. These are things that you can do that I can't.
Yeah.
What was your switch, or was there a switch that allowed you to see through take the colored glasses off and actually see that there was really a disparity, that there was a difference in the way people's framing occurred?
Sure. Well, a lot of credit for that goes to my upbringing. I think I was very lucky, very fortunate, frankly, to be raised in the South. And that may seem like a very strange thing for,
Not really.
I think it might not sound strange to you, but I think to
Right.
a lot of white folks, in particular white liberals,
Right.
would be stunned by my saying that, because a lot of white liberals who live in Northeastern or West Coast or other places who look at the South, as just this sort of backward swamp of folks. What they sometimes miss is that for those of us who are white and grew up in the South and nonetheless ended up progressive, which is not a given by any stretch, but if you are white and you grew up in the South and you ended up on the left, one thing that I know is that your progressivism came through the crucible of race. It had to, because race is the background noise of everything that happens here. You cannot grow up in Nashville, where I grew up, one of the main locations of the civil rights struggle historically, and not understand the centrality of racism. Whereas I think you could grow up in Portland, Oregon, even though racism is the background noise of everything there too, as black folks in Portland will readily tell you. But you could be white in Portland, or white in Seattle, or white in LA or the Bay Area, and perhaps maybe come to your progressivism through different issues and different lenses. You can't do that in the South. You may come up in the South and still have great climate awareness and economic awareness, environmental issues, militarism, but race is going to be there. So growing up in the South, I was able to not only see the disparity, but also to have a context historically and a narrative to explain it. And I had parents that were very clear about that. I went to a historically black preschool. Most of my early childhood friends were black kids. I know every white person says we have black friends and we're usually lying. That's like all I had for the first several years of school, because that's who I was around. And so I was able to see when they were treated differently. I didn't always know what was happening. I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I didn't have the language, but I could see with my own eyes and feel with my own heart what was being done. Something was dividing us, something was keeping us apart, and that they were being treated differentially. And I think that lens was very helpful as I went through life and, ultimately became an adult, went to college in New Orleans, where I was able to see very, very clearly the disparity between what it meant to be white uptown at Tulane versus what it meant to be black in that city. Even though it's a black city, culturally and demographically, it was a very divided one. And it was easier for me to see that, I think, because of my upbringing.
Well, one of the things that I admire with you is you have the cojones to actually say, talk to white liberals in general, and just stating the fact that you're born in the South. The things in the South aren't a hell of a lot different specifically than the North. I mean, the busting occurred in Boston. I mean, the killings in Minnesota occurred in progressive Minneapolis, and we can talk about all the laws in Oregon that you had to be out of certain places at dark.
Right.
So there are not a lot of people that have the honesty. By the way, I do a whole lot of activism, and it's amazing that most of all the progressive activists kind of look like you when we go to our conferences, and when I do go to a few right-wing things, they are so much trying not to be seen as racist that they tend to overbear on when guys like me show up.
Yeah. I believe it. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things going on that I think we have to be aware of. I mean, number one, it's that geographic piece, that this conceit that racism is this location, that it's over here but not over there, is a conceit that we just can't afford. The whole nation was constructed on the scaffolding of white supremacy. Now, it looks different in different parts of the country. It plays out differently in different parts of the country. So Oregon, as you referenced, they just wanted black folks out of the territory altogether, whereas in Alabama, they didn't. They wanted black folks to do all the hard work, but it's still white supremacy. The fact that you had more sundown towns in the state of Illinois than any other state in America, southern and middle Illinois, in particular central Illinois, where black folks had to be out by 5 o'clock, Whereas in the South, no, you wanted black folks around because they were going to be putting your child down at 7 o'clock and they were going to be cleaning the house at 8 o'clock. And they were, so there was a difference, but it's all white supremacy. Dr. King said Chicago was the hardest place that he ever tried to organize, and they threw bottles and rocks at him in Cicero during a march there in, I believe, 1966. So number one, there's no geographic differentiation quantitatively, just maybe qualitatively in terms of how it looks. Secondly, there's also not this divide between the sort of good white liberal and the bad white reactionary. Yes, there are differences of degree. And on balance, I would rather hang out with and try to bring over white progressive folks to an anti-racist lens than white reactionaries, because I think it's easier and it's less of a distance to travel. But the white liberal and white progressive is so bought in to the idea of their own goodness that sometimes they're the hardest to reach. They can be very I mean, this woman in Central Park, from everything that I have heard about her, Amy Cooper, is a Democrat. She has given money to Democratic candidates. She was someone who supported Hillary Clinton. I mean, this is someone who, if you had told her 3 weeks earlier that she was going to do this, probably would have said, oh, no. But here's the thing. She, just like everybody else, regardless of politics, has been conditioned to not just fear black men, which I think is a misnomer. It's to have contempt for the lives and the rights of black people. And when the chips are down, you will play that card. That's the race card we never talk about. It's
Tim, you've got to repeat that, because that is something that a lot of people have not internalized yet. It's not that it's not even solely about racism. It's also about the contempt of that guy saying, you need to put the leash. Who the hell are you to tell me to put a leash on my dog? And then I'm going to use the enforcer because you had the nerve to tell me that. And we all know what the enforcers do, right?
Right. And she can sit and say that she didn't realize. I mean, I know her argument now is, I never thought about how it's different for police to come. But she did, because you said African-American male threatening my life, which was a lie and an unnecessary descriptor. Like, if you're just trying to describe the guy, you would need to say more than African-American male. You need to say African-American male, 5'9", wearing a checkered shirt and whatever, because you're actually trying to describe. If all you're doing is saying black male, what you're saying is, I don't care if y'all come and beat this one or whoever else you find in the park who you think might have been the guy I was talking to. And whether it was conscious, whether it was subconscious, it isn't just fear. I think the mistake has been, some of the coverage has been, it's this internalized subconscious implicit bias and fear. It's not fear. You don't respond when you're afraid. You don't get up in the face of the thing that you're afraid of. I'm afraid, if I was in the woods and a bear came upon me, I would not start pointing at the bear, yelling at the bear, screaming at the bear, running towards the bear. I would freeze, because that's what they tell you to do, I think. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time in the woods. But I would either freeze, or I would run, or I would try to climb a tree or something. I certainly wouldn't agitate the bear. If I'm afraid of a dog that's off a leash in my neighborhood, I don't go up to the dog and scream at the dog. I freeze or I run away. So she wasn't afraid. She had this internalized contempt, at the very least indifference. I'll say that. At the very least, a disregard for the well-being of black life. And at the very most, contempt for black life. And that's in spite of her politics. So this is why I say this isn't a right and left issue. This certainly is not a Democrat and Republican issue. This is an issue about how white supremacy has affected everyone. Am I saying that she's the equivalent of a racist cop who, no, I'm not. But I'm saying that she's affected by the same poison that racist cop is affected by, that George Zimmerman was affected by, that the guys that killed Ahmaud Arbery were affected by. And so we all have to take some accountability and responsibility for that.
I think I won over one of my right-wing listeners, because he was shocked when he pointed out that progressives are racist too. And he expected me to say, oh, no, we are the value of the world or whatever. And I said, absolutely, you are right. And it took him for a curve. I actually agreed with him.
Right. Well, they all assume that the world is Republicans and Democrats,
right,
and conservatives, and that's why they always want to talk about the Democratic Party being the party of slaveholders. Yeah, I know. We all know. No kidding. That's not shocking. What is interesting is that the Republican and conservative folks are the ones who want to fly that flag now. You know,
Exactly.
those of us on the left and those of us who vote Democrat most of the time, whether we call ourselves that or not, we gave that up a long time ago. We're
Right.
actually really glad that our side, quote unquote, lost. But of course, that was never the progressive side. By definition, conservatism and reactionary politics is about maintaining existing hierarchies of power. That's what the Confederacy was about. They were Democrats, but they were the ones who were trying to conserve the existing power structure. So no progressive was ever in favor of that. Lincoln himself, who of course was not that progressive racially, but Lincoln did say that labor was prior to capital, that labor created all the wealth that capital has. We think that's Karl Marx that said that, and he did.
Imagine that,
So did
yes.
Abraham Lincoln. So the fact that the Republicans were the party of abolition then and the Democrats were the party of slavery means very little. You know, the Dodgers used to be in Brooklyn too, and things change. You know,
But, and we also must remember that in and above everything else, Abraham Lincoln said the reason that he signed the Emancipation Proclamation was to maintain the Union. So
that's it.
Yeah,
Right. That's
it wasn't out of some sort of a moral reason. It was to maintain the Union. But getting back to Minneapolis, what are your thoughts? I want to see if it's Congress to mine. What are your thoughts on how Mayor Jacob Frey's been handling the situation?
Well, I thought, you know, his very initial statement about how if this were anyone else, we would be arrested was a very important statement to make because it is critical that political leaders at a time like this, white political leaders in particular, make that kind of statement. You know, the mayor there, very strong, and he's been criticized for it by the police, particularly by the police union in Minneapolis, who I should point out it's a union that is headed by a guy who is a militant Trump supporter and connected to a cop biker gang that several years ago, several of that gang of that biker club's members were found with white power patches on their own website. So this is a cop union, like a lot of police unions, that I think really functions as a protection racket, not a union. But in any event, the mayor there has said, you know, he doesn't want the police in Minneapolis attending these warrior trainings because really it teaches the cops that they're basically soldiers and that the people that they police are essentially the enemy, which is a horrible mentality. If you go into a neighborhood with a wartime footing, you're going to treat people like the enemy. That's why they want to have the tanks and the military. Why do cops have camo? Like that, you know, that question, why are cops going into urban environments with camouflage intended for either the jungle or the desert? That doesn't make any sense unless you're going in as a soldier who wants to pretend that you're in Afghanistan or wants to pretend that you're in Iraq or wants to pretend that you're back in Vietnam. The mayor there has been very strong about criticizing and condemning that, and I hope he will continue to do so. The problem in that town is the DA. The problem is a district attorney who apparently wants us to believe that he doesn't have enough evidence to. Now, I understand when it comes to conviction, there's a standard of evidence and there's a process that we have to let play out. And these officers are certainly deserving of a fair trial. And we know how that works. But the idea that you don't have enough evidence for an arrest, if any of us did that on camera or not, and there were witnesses, we would be arrested. Whether we would be convicted is a whole different issue. But to say that you don't even have enough for a criminal charge flies in the face of every bit of logic that anyone in law enforcement would ever try to bring to bear in a situation like this. It makes no sense at all. And it raises the question, what kind of pressure is he feeling from the Department of Justice? What kind of pressure is he feeling from folks within the police union? I don't know for sure, but I do know this is why we need special prosecutors in cases like this, because when you have a DA's office that works hand in glove with law enforcement, as it must. I understand that. I watch Law and Order. I know that thing at the beginning where they say the cops and the DAs prosecute. I get it. But that's why when the cops are implicated in wrongdoing, you have to have independent prosecutors, independent folks looking at that and making the decision.
You know, and I think the other thing the mayor is going to have to be concerned of is with all the destruction that you've had in the city right now, whoever runs against him is going to try to somehow turn that into he didn't have control of the city. I mean, a lot of people I've heard, you know, been complaining so much about all this rioting and destruction. Nobody really wants to see people's businesses destroyed. But I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the foundation of the United States of America sort of started with something like that, didn't it?
Well, there were no sit-ins at King George's Palace.
Right.
There were no, nighttime horseback freedom rides. There was no nonviolent resistance to the Brits. There was nothing but guns and a lot of blood. I mean, we're talking about a country founded in violence. Now, we can have a discussion about the tactical and strategic value of property destruction. We can have that discussion, just as they had to have that discussion in South Africa. And Nelson Mandela was part of that conversation and believed in sabotaging commercial property and state property, did not want to attack human life, but did talk about property violence. We can have that discussion, but you know who isn't part of that discussion is anyone who has not already committed to the struggle for racial justice and equity. If you're in that struggle, then you're welcome to be part of that conversation. Someone who didn't say anything when George Floyd was killed, who didn't tweet anything out. If you're Tommy Lauren, Aryan Rage Barbie on Twitter, talking about how terrible it is that Black folks are burning stuff in Minneapolis, but when George Floyd was killed, you didn't say anything, you are not invited to the conversation. You're not part of the conversation. You're a vulture on the conversation. So if you want to, all of us who are part of this movement, we have this debate amongst ourselves all the time. What is the proper tactic? What is the proper strategy? What is the proper mix of protest, including potentially, the threat of violent protest? What is the proper mix of electoral politics? What is the proper mix of all of those things? But if you're not part of the movement, why are you talking? If you're not committed to racial justice, why are you talking?
Absolutely. So I mean, another quick subject. This is sort of an aside. A CNN reporter got arrested yesterday. His name was what is his name? Omar Jimenez.
Yeah.
Black Latino. I'm a Black Latino. He's a Black Latino. Okay. There was another guy, Josh Campbell. Guess what? He's also with CNN. Guess what who just looks like? Hey,
well,
Tim,
his
like you, brother.
name is Josh Campbell. He's white.
Yeah, he looks like you, brother.
No offense. I just don't know too many guys named Josh Campbell. Right.
So, and then he said, they were nice with him. They said, go here, go there. Right. We're here. The purpose of the riots were to protest against killing, assassinating, murdering a Black guy. And the cops that are coming to create peace, what did they do? Tell me the mentality that goes with that, Tim.
Well, I think part of it is that they are on this wartime footing. They have been led to believe by some of their own higher ups, not the chief there, who I think is trying to, sort of control. The chief is a man of color who is trying, to fight against that. And he's actually been involved in lawsuits against brutal cops.
Yeah, he was.
So, I mean, it's not him, but again, the police union, which think about Derek Chauvin, the main guy who had his knee in the neck of George Floyd. This is a guy with 18 complaints. He's been involved in 3 shootings. Now, most cops will go their entire career, never, ever have to fire their gun. Yes. Never. He's been involved in 3 shootings. The mathematical odds of that happening by coincidence are just about non-existent. So then you have to start to ask yourself, why would he and his colleagues there think that they could get away with this, even with the video rolling? Well, because in the past, apparently, they have gotten away with things either similar or perhaps not quite that egregious, but still quite questionable.
Or actually, Tim, probably quite that outrageous. We just didn't have it on tape.
Of course, right. Some of them probably were that egregious. But when you've got 18 complaints and you've only had 2 reprimands, nothing more serious than that in your file, no actual real punishment, you have every reason to think that you'll get away with it. So I think partly it's that. There's a wartime mentality. They view the community as the enemy. They protect their own at all costs. These are the guys that will say things like, well, my only job is to get home to my family at night. No, that's not actually your job. When you interviewed to be a cop and they said, here's the job description, it did not say anything about you will be paid X amount per week so that you can get back to your family. No, your job is to uphold the law and to do so without violating the Constitution. And if you can't do that, you need to find a different job or a different hobby or take up woodworking or do something else because you're clearly not cut out for that job. And so I think that's part of it. The second thing, as far as the differential treatment of the CNN reporters, there were stories out of Ferguson back in 2014, not even regarding the way media was treated, the way protesters were treated. There was a white guy who wrote a piece, it was circulated pretty heavily at the time, about how he and a buddy, so it was a white guy and a black guy, they're friends, they were both at the demonstrations in Ferguson, and the black guy was assaulted, brutalized by police, and the white guy was just told to move along. So this isn't even just the way they treat, journalists. It's the way that they view the people who are out there protesting in the first place, really as the enemies. When you have the head of the cop union there who's called Black Lives Matter a terrorist organization, you're setting a tone for your police that leads them to believe that this is no different than fighting ISIS or, fighting Al-Qaeda, basically.
It's interesting because, people kind of get upset when I say this because, you have black cops as well. You have Latino cops, you have Asian cops, you have all of that. And I said, whenever they get into the institution too many times, what they are blue. They've lost their whatever sense that they have. And it's interesting because when they appear in the justice system, however, that isn't true. You know that when Philando Castile got shot, it was in that area as well. Yeah. That particular cop got off. Yeah. But when Mohammed Noor shot Justine, I think her name was Ruzik or something like that. The people were outraged. Yeah. Because this was a blonde white woman shot by a black cop, and he had to go, and he learned that. Oh yeah,
and they even turned it into a cultural thing because he's Muslim. And so it was one of those things where they could say, oh, was he offended that she, I remember people saying things about how he was offended by how she was dressed and how maybe he was culturally, religiously offended. It's insanity, the kind of stuff that was said about him, which you would never say about a white officer and isn't said about white officers when those things are done to people of color. But the point you raise about cops of color is very important. This is not about, and this goes back to the white liberal versus white conservative piece. It's not even about sort of, black versus white versus brown. When you're part of a policing culture, when you're part of a law enforcement culture that encourages you to think of your partner and the other people in that particular precinct as your only line of defense against animals and against criminals and against terrorists, there does come a point where you would have to be incredibly strong emotionally, more so than most of us probably are, to be able to resist that, because you break down the defenses of otherwise good people. I think a lot of people get into policing for the right reasons. I think a lot of people go into law enforcement to do right by the community. Here's the problem. When you see wrong being done by the community and you then try to report it, you get in trouble within the community of officers. We saw this in Baltimore. After Freddie Gray died, there were two different cops, both white guys, who were former Baltimore PD. And they have both now gone public, they did back at that time, talking about how when they were on the force, they were horribly disturbed by some of the brutality they saw, the corruption they saw within the police department, planting drugs on black folks, beating up black folks who were suspected of crime brutally, and then expecting everyone to cover it up. And this one particular cop talked about how when he tried to turn in the officer who did that, the whole department turned on him. They put a rat on his desk or in his car to signify, a dead rat, to signify that he was a rat. The chief of police, or somebody who was maybe a sergeant or somebody above him, said, your career is over, you might as well retire. Both of these guys were pushed out of policing. So it isn't about every cop being a horrible person. Again, I think most people are decent people. But if you're a decent person and you're caught up in an indecent culture, in a culture that is about oppression, it can't be very surprising when over time you become part of that. And if you try to rebel against it, you get checked and you get put back in your place and you get punished. And so I think we have to change the culture of law enforcement. It's not just about getting more black cops and more brown cops. It's about changing the mentality of law enforcement that currently pervades most communities in this country.
Couldn't have said it any better. So Tim, where do we go from here, Minneapolis and beyond?
Well, I think we've got to start talking about and take advantage of this horrible opportunity that we've been afforded by, frankly, by the coronavirus pandemic. Because, and what I mean by that is this, what the pandemic is showing us, I think, for some of us, obviously some people not getting the memo, they're the ones out at the state capitol ready to open everything back up and roll the dice with other people's lives, interestingly. But I think a lot of white Americans right now are sitting around, maybe for the first time, asking questions that black and brown folks ask all the time. Questions like, is it safe to go to the store? Is it safe to go shopping? Is it safe to run around, take a jog around the neighborhood? These are questions that Black folks have been asking for a real long time, because John Crawford needed to know desperately before he went into that Walmart in Ohio several years back, is it safe? As it turns out, it wasn't. Tamir Rice needed to know, is it safe to go to that park and play with a toy gun, something that white kids do every day in this country without fear of being shot by cops? And so if people of color have always asked those questions and now white folks are having to ask them, maybe we can take that opportunity to say, hey, you know that fear that you're feeling right now? Totally justifiable, totally understandable. And you know what? It's the thing that they've been telling you, that they've been telling us for decades, for centuries. So maybe now we can create some empathy. Maybe we can create an empathic connection between the experiences of people of color who are always wondering whether it's safe for them, who are always wondering, am I going to have a job in 3 months? Who are always wondering, am I going to have affordable health care? Who are always wondering, if I get sick, will I be able to get treatment and will I be able to afford it? None of those things are new for people of color, but for an awful lot of white folks, they are. So what can we learn from this moment? If we take the opportunity that's been handed us to create empathy and to create connection, and then to build movements around that, then I think we can come out of this moment, both the horror of what's happened in Minneapolis, but the national and even global horror of COVID-19 with a very different sensibility.
Tim Wise, anti-racist crusader and writer, thank you so kindly for being a part of Politics Done Right.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we got a caller, 713. Let me get on that phone now.
Hey, Yegbertos. This is Norman.
Norman, talk to me. What's going on, my brother?
All right, man. So this conversation is been dwindling down to sound about whites versus blacks, and it's so wrong. We've got to understand the water we swim in.
Talk to me.
It's not about individual racism. You know, I have a lot of white friends, just like how a lot of white people can say they have black friends. It's not about your individual feelings or your individual way of dealing with black people. It's to recognize that the system is built as racism as a feature, not a bug. It is to protect property, not people. And that's something that I'm recently starting to come around to after been doing some more history, looking at the history of the country. Even when you start going a lot more deeper, it's every black man is afraid of the cops, while a person that's a non-POC is not. Why is that? We need to really start thinking about that. So one of the other things I want to really see is where do we go from here? I don't think it is a conversation we need to have. We've been having for the last 60 years, and we're going to have for the next 100. It doesn't really make a sense if that is what we're going to do.
Well, you know, I like what you said. Oh, I'm sorry.
So the last thing is, you know, true acknowledgement of the history, and that this is a feature, needs to happen and the coronavirus is allowing us to see that as a feature. And this incident, all of this is not a mistake. It's not an accident that these are all occurring at the same time.
Norman,
it is.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think that is a lot that we talk about when we say things like racism is actually a tool. It is a necessary tool for the system to continue. And I've kind of spoken to people about why it is a necessary tool for the system to continue. But you said something that is even deeper, and I'm so glad you said it. And by the way, Russell Glassner, stay with me because I want to answer your statement that you made there, Russell. So don't run away. Stick around, Russell. Yeah, Norman, what happens is when you talked about a property document, we can look at things from the foundation of the Constitution. The only people that could vote in the beginning of the Constitution were property holding white men. In other words, not even all white men. Property owning white men were the only people allowed to vote. So property was always at the foundation. When we talk about corporations, we talk about personhood of a corporation. And what is a corporation? A conglomerate of capital. I mean, we can talk about that. One statement that you made is so profound because everything is about capital. They allowed those people to roam free in the streets last night. And why did they allow it? They didn't expect the amount of property damage to come out. Why are they going to control it now? Why are they going to get heavy-handed now? Because there's a lot of property damage. I mean, when we ask about
Exactly.
when we take a look at the thing that should have upset these Americans, and Tim Weiss spoke about that. Tim Weiss, I've known this guy for a long time in business. He said it quite well, right? How comes people were more upset about wearing a mask than having that guy's feet or knee on that guy's neck? It's racism, yeah, but it's a little bit deeper. Black people are still considered lesser than, still property. And in fact, white people consider themselves property as well, unless you're in the top. You think about what Donald Trump has to say. Donald Trump is willing to sacrifice his own constituents. And he had Glenn Beck and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick pretty much saying the same thing. We are willing to sacrifice for capital. They've said it. So, Norman, you hit the nail on the head.
We value it when it comes to values, and pre-slavery, slaves were very valuable.
Right.
During slavery, slaves were very valuable. So masters would not kill as many slaves.
Exactly.
Now, slaves are no longer the big capital that they are.
Norman, stop it.
And
Norman, stop it.
We and all the other poor whites that have been working to make the system work, and all the other people of color this system has been built on our backs.
Brother,
Yes.
I want to interrupt you here for a reason, because this is something that I try to tell. And I'd like Daniel Ledo and Michael Sisek and Lee Grant, my favorite conservatives, to understand that they are now slaves, right? They've always been slaves, but now it's more you can qualify it, and it's more quantitative. And the reason I'm saying that is as follows, right? You just said something that I talk about all the time. I don't know if you've heard me say it on the news before, but I said, to some extent, capitalism was an antiseptic form of slavery. They had to clothe, when black folk were the slaves, they had to clothe you, they had to feed you, they had to do all these things. So you had these expenses. With capitalism, they don't even have to give you health care. When you were a slave, at least you had to have some form of health care. They had to keep you alive. Now, you're disposable. Capitalism allowed the disposability of the working entity. And that's what a lot of people have yet to realize. And if you're just a working entity, you are nothing more than a slave. And you may be a high-paid slave, a low-paid slave, but you're a slave. Go ahead, Norman.
Let me close out by just saying one other thing. I just want to make sure that people get where I'm coming from.
Yes, sir.
People, we deal with three words when it comes to moving from this spot. And that's something that I don't want to have the last 60 years conversation in the last 100, but basically, until everybody's been looking for black people to forgive or do something, or people of color to forgive what has been happening in the past.
Yes.
And I think that the equation is, I'm an engineer too, so basically this mix cannot happen without first acknowledging where we are coming from and acknowledging the water we swim in. Then we can ask each other for grace before we can even get to forgiveness and move on from this racial question and this racial stuff that we're all dealing with. Each one of us needs to really look at it. And I'm not talking esoterically, I'm talking personally about myself as well. I get to look at the advantages that I've gotten to this point because I was one of the chosen to be an engineer, to do what I've done to date. I'm not anything. There were a lot of other guys that were of darker complexion than me, for crying out loud, that did not get the opportunities I did. So basically, I want to put that on the table. It is for every one of us to recognize the water we swim in. And it's not about And this tier system that I keep talking about it's pervasive, and we each need to look at it and look
Brother,
at the system that we're in.
Brother Norman, from your lips to America's ears. Thank you so kindly, my brother.
All right, good day.
Take care now. Folks, that was Norman Reynolds. He's always in the chat room as well. Good friend of mine as well. Look, folks, that was present. Now, I want to go back. Before I go ahead and play the other videos, I need to answer Russell Glaser. Russell, I know what you're saying. You know, it's easy for us to jump on those kinds of numbers. Let me tell the audience what Russell says. Russell says, despite composing of about 7% of the population, young black men commit over half of all violent crimes. First of all, it's not 7% of the population. Black people are 13% of the population. If you extrapolate all of that over, it's probably more like 3% of the population or something like that you're talking about when you're talking about young black men, depending on where you call young. But that said, there are certain things that you have to understand, Brother Russell, and it goes as follows. First of all, BS in, BS out. Whatever you put in our criminal justice system, look at the way that George Floyd was handled. He was thrown, something about a check got written, he was thrown to the ground, and he was going to get into the system. The same thing happened to black kids all over the country. They do a small offense. They are loaded into the system. They rob something, they're loaded into the system. They get into a fight, they're loaded into a system. They fight, it's battery, so it looks like a violent crime. While white kids, if you take a look at how they handle those guys with the AK-47s, shouting and spitting in the face of officers, not one of them getting arrested, not one of them getting a violent offense. The same thing happened with kids. They go into a riot at Prairie View or one of these colleges. Black kids, they arrest them. They get a record. Violent. If you go to a white school or whatever, no record, no violence. So if you're looking at the FBI statistics solely to say, well, these people are more violent, then you're fooling yourself. Like I tell people all the time, a lot of folks, you know, and white people, my white brothers and sisters, listen to this. It's irrational for you to really be fearful of black men, of black people, because more damage has been done by white people on black than the other side, or by the converse. The things that white people have done to black bodies, and I'm talking after slavery, the people that should really be scared are black folk. Yet black bodies are treated like, people, on TV, on the television, they make you believe that the black man is this thing to be feared. No man is to be feared. I mean, they have the same proclivities. I mean, when you saw Floyd with his knees on a black man's neck, that was a violent, evil act. Black people and white people do violent, evil acts, no one more than the other. Now, when it comes to crime also has a socio-economic component. So if you want to compare these different groups, you have to go to certain parts of Appalachia to compare to the parts of the ghettos or the barrios to show that, and then you would show that there is socioeconomic congruency with crime. Same thing goes with we decided to have wedded marriages in America where there's one man and one woman or family unit or whatever, but there are more broken family units in the past in poor households. I mean, you have to stop looking at things from a pigmentation point of view and start looking at it from a human point of view. When you start looking at things from a human point of view, first of all, you realize how similar all people are, because the hue gene, the gene that gives pigmentation, has little to do with character. Very little. Character is something of a cultural thing, that it's not innate. It's something that you breed into. And when people start to understand that, the silliness start to make no sense. Black people in America right now, if people want to fear anybody based on the color of skin, which is stupid, because color of skin is just that, only color of skin. And you have been programmed to believe that there's more to color of skin so that we could have a pecking order so that you and I can't get together and beat the oligarchy and beat the rich people. Because if they have you poor white folk, fighting me, a black folk, by saying, hey, you guys have to look out for each other because he's trying to come and take what you got, then you don't have time to fight for the person who's oppressing you all. Like I said, we are all, capitalism is nothing more than a form of slavery in a very nicely wrapped box. They optimized slavery so that it wasn't color-based anymore. Learn that and then you'll be somewhere. 786, if you want to speak, my friend, please push the number 1. All right, 786, come on in. You're on 786.
Egberto, it's Ron Cole. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Cole?
Good. Yeah. How you been? I love your show still. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you, brother. You want to make a comment and put your voice out to our wonderful audience? We have a great audience, man.
Yes, you do. It's actually always been impressive. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of put something forward about, I'm especially active in this realm. You probably are aware of that since we've known each other for years. I just wanted to make a note of something. I forget the doctor's name that did a speech one time, but she did a speech that I attended, and she said, she asked the audience, an all-white audience, if you could change places with any black person in America, whether that be Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, anybody else, would you do it? There's about 600 people in the crowd. Not a single white person raised their hand.
That says it all.
And to me, and she makes the point, you see, it's not like we don't understand what's going on. The entire white population knows what's going on, yet they choose to do nothing for the most part. And that's where we've made our greatest mistake. The people that are anti-racist, the whites, Asians, everybody else, literally need to stand up this time and say, this time we do something. Because we've been standing here doing nothing for 400 years.
Look, I am so with you, and I think that is why I do what I do. That's why you do what you do. Because peer pressure is a very hard, difficult thing. I speak to a lot of right-wing, I live in a very right-wing area. I speak to a lot of good white people that are just scared as hell to get out of the mold. Deep inside of their hearts, they're very good people, right? But it's that peer pressure thing, brother. That peer pressure thing is a hard thing to crack, man.
Well, it's more than just that. It's your grandmother who immigrated from Ireland, your grandfather who was from North Carolina. You grew up seeing it. And a lot of people don't want to confront their family or their friends or others. But the truth is, it's time to confront this.
Absolutely. Let me tell you something, brother. Thank you so kindly, as usual, for your great calls. Anything else you want to add before we go to my video?
No, just go ahead and go to your video, my friend. Thank you for keeping up the good work, and glad to hear you're still going strong.
Thank you, brother. Have a great one. All right, folks, let's go ahead. I want you to hear what's his name again? Trymaine. He was on, I've put CNN, it should be MSNBC. He was on MSNBC. And actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to play Ali Velshi, because I said you have to report all of this in the proper context. Ali Velshi did that wonderfully yesterday. Check out Ali Velshi, and then we'll take it on the other side. It is great to have real reporters covering issues or incidents like riots that we're having in Minneapolis, Minnesota right now, because a lot of time we can lose context. We can lose context as what's happening. I want you to listen to Ali Velshi in detail, somebody who understands exactly what's going on, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Police are not here. The police have been evacuated. The fire engines can't get in here. There is no ability to bring anybody in here to solve this problem. So I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. it is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started, and there's a crowd that is relishing that. There is a deep sense of grievance and complaint here, and that is the thing, that when you discount people who are doing things to public property that they shouldn't be doing, it does have to be understood that this city has got, for the last several years, an issue with police, and it's got a real sense of the deep sense of grievance of inequality. And you mentioned earlier, before we had video, how did we know about these things? Now we have video. We have three angles of this thing, and the people who are talking to me, not an investigator, and I don't have access to the information that investigators have, but they are saying, what more do you need? You've got three angles of video. Why haven't there been arrests? And the FBI and the Minneapolis Bureau of Apprehensions and the Hennepin County Attorney, all of whom are proceeding very carefully. This crowd is not looking for careful right now. They are looking for something that feels like justice, and they don't seem to be getting it.
A lot of people don't get it, right? It's like, why destroy all this property? Why create all this havoc? Let the system work. The system has not been working. What more does it take for a police officer who, as Ali Velshi said, three angles, murdered an innocent man? And not only murdered an innocent man, but for this to happen over and over again. Yes, it is bad that a lot of people are getting their businesses burned. But you know what? It's a big question. Nobody is there talking about how evil this officer is for doing what he has done. They're just looking at the reaction to people who have no other recourse to show they have some sort of power, and that some sort of power is to show pain to all those people who haven't come to their rescue. You know, I mean, a lot of people say, well, a lot of innocent people are getting hurt. Their businesses are getting hurt. That's true. Their livelihoods are getting hurt. That's true. But in a society where it works for some and not for others, what else are they to do? What else are they to do when they are getting nothing from anywhere else? They're getting noticed now. How did the people remember something called the Boston Tea Party? Remember our founding fathers? Remember when we don't get what we want out of something we think is ours, the United States of America? What do? Remember? Folks, context is everything. And having a reporter like Ali Velshi go out there, and it's not about condoning violence, it's not about condoning riots, it's about what do you want people to do if the system doesn't work for them. And you know, this is just a small incident around an issue about a black man getting assassinated by police officers. But this is an issue that's going to grow. This is an issue that's going to grow when we find out what the corporatocracy is doing to our brothers and sisters in Appalachia. What the corporatocracy is doing to people all over the country as this pandemic starts to metastasize throughout the country. What the corporatocracy, what the plutocracy, what the wealthy has done to many people. You think this is bad? Wait till Trump's people find out that they've been had. They're weaponized. Folks, this is only the beginning. Only the beginning. And you know, I sent Ali Velshi a DM because after I saw what Ali Velshi did, I'm like, I got to send Ali a DM. So I sent him a DM and I sent him this video that I did. And I said, hey, man, thank you. Good work. I'm glad we had somebody who was able to provide context. He replied and he said, man, the right wing is using the same clip that you're using, but they're saying that I'm condoning violence. I'm glad to see that you see the narrative that we're really trying to get out there. And I'm like, of course. Anyhow, last video of the day, let's go ahead to MSNBC, Trymaine lead. It was great. Check this out. Today, MSNBC reporter Trymaine Lee exploded with a rant that I thought was so necessary to explain to the American populace what's going back. You know, we keep getting antiseptic type of news. We keep getting sort of disinfected news. Well, he came out real raw as a MSNBC correspondent. Check this out, and then we'll take it on the other side.
To hear Vice President Joe Biden articulate it the way he did, and contrast that with Donald Trump's tweets. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. We saw the outrage last night in Minnesota, but I think at the root of it is we have never known a time when police officers went into white communities and vigilantes shot down white sons and brothers. We've never known a time when black police officers and white officers have gone into people's homes and shot them dead in their beds. We've never known a time when police officers went into white communities and put their knees on the necks of sons and fathers and brothers and felt as the life seeped out of them. That's routine in black America. We've never not known that kind of policing in our country. And so when you see the rage and you see the anger and you see the burning buildings and there's concern about those buildings, there's concern about the bodies, the broken bodies. And we have to tell our children that this is America. And there's an inference there. Are we less than if they in the street? Are we less than if they can do it on camera and look up as people are saying he can't breathe? People are left with very little choice. And as we sift through another morning in America and sift through the mess of America, America's true mess that we've never cleaned up, this is what you get. And so when you see young people, there's an old saying that if the village doesn't embrace a child, the child will burn the village down to feel its warmth. Black America is needing to feel some warmth. And when you see the young who are they're caught up in emotion and they're out there and doing things to get from under.
There's nothing else to say. There's nothing else to say. Anyhow, folks, we're coming to the end of the show. I want to ask you guys to please remember, support the show. And how can you support the show? You can support the show simply by going to patreon.com/politics done right. Again, you can go to patreon.com/politics done right. Let me go ahead and put that link in there. Subscribe here to patreon.com/politics done right. Become a member. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of enlightening to do. And you know what? We can only do it with your support. Alternatively, you can go to our PayPal connection, and that is at paypal.me/politics done right. That is paypal.me/politics done right. If you're on YouTube, you can give us a super chat by just clicking on that $ and saying, hey, we like you and we want to keep you here. So you can hit that $ for a super chat, and that's how you can support us as well. And of course, you can go to our store. Our store is at store.politicsdoneright.com. And what can you get at our store? You can go ahead and get the book, As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. It's a book that will show you all you need to do to learn about the economy and about the patent system in an easy-to-understand way, so that when you are out there and these guys on MSNBC, CBS, ABC, Fox News, or whatever are trying to fill your minds in with things that really don't matter, it really works. For those of you who know that I'm an activist, I've been an activist that sometimes had a weight problem, that sometimes had pressure problem. Hey, Lose Weight and Be Fit Now is what I did. I wrote that book as my experience as to how I lost, I think, 30, 40 pounds and started to get in shape. Check that out. And of course, you can think things like our cup. So folks, please become a subscriber. Go to patreon.com/politics done right. I have the link in there. Go to paypal.me/politics done right, as well as store.politicsdoneright.com. And again, I didn't turn it on. I must be getting old. Here you go on the screen. You can see all our products, T-shirts and pens and stickers and all of that scrolling through. But anyhow, we are at the end of the show. I don't think I have any super chats to acknowledge. We're at the end of the show. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you know how I end this baby. I am what again? Out! I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.